Pop-O-Holics. Welcome to Pop-O-Holics, the show about hot takes, hotter than pancakes, but we're a couple of desperados talking about a problematic United States of America, circa early 1900s. When was it? When did this?
1800s. 1800s.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thanks, history buff. Appreciate that. If this is your first time listening to the show, welcome to Pop-O-Holics. This is where me and a few friends, sometimes a special guest, come together to talk about all things pop culture. This couple of months, we've been talking all Tarantino in celebration of his penultimate film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But today's episode is about Django Unchained. What we do first is talk about the news. We go into what we've been consuming for the week, then talk about our weekly poll, then go into the main topic. But I wouldn't be here alone talking nonsense and pop culture and pop icons. If it was just me, no, you wouldn't listen to that. I've got two of my bestest buds here, Mr.
Chris Conkling.
And Brian Dupree.
Mr. Brian Dupree. Mr. Chris Conkling. So good to have you. How you guys doing today?
Doing great. Good to be here.
Yeah, doing
per
well,
usual.
Man.
Well, it's good to be here. So we're not going to delay any further. We're going to go into talking news with Brian's Wacky News Corner.
So I can't remember if we discussed this. I know we had talked about Chris having to watch The Hateful Eight on the Netflix version, which is broken up into 3 or 4 episodes, I believe, about 50 minutes each. But according to Screen Rant, which we'll link in the show notes, we may be getting a 4-hour version of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in episodic form on Netflix. And I am very down for this because I know there was a whole acting job by Tim Roth in this movie that is completely out of the theatrical version. And I was kind of surprised when I saw his name in the credits. I was like, oh, they just kept his name in the credits.
In parentheses, cut.
Cut. It's like, sorry, Tim.
He's a good friend of Tarantino. Tarantino couldn't help himself but keep him in the credits.
No, I'm excited.
Gotta troll him a little bit.
I'm really excited for our rewatch of Hateful Eight. That's going to be next week's episode, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
And Chris is going to get to watch it with fresh eyes on the 4 chapter, and I'm excited to dive into it in that format. So, I mean, I'll probably have more to say on this after next week's, after I've experienced the Hateful Eight in this format. But I think it's really cool, and I think I'm gonna, it'd be nice to be able to sit down and watch a Tarantino movie. As what happens, we've been going through this entire month watching Tarantino films, and sometimes they're pretty long, and you're like, man, I wish there was like a break that I could like watch this in the morning before work, or watch it later, and just kind of split it up into some episodic stuff. So I'm all for this with the way he tells stories.
Truth be told, I think there's probably a 50-50 chance of this actually happening. Because while I was doing research for Django Unchained, I actually came across an interview in which he said that he wanted to make Django Unchained a 4-hour miniseries. So I don't know if this is like a trend with him since Django, but the Django Unchained 4-hour version never came to fruition. I don't know if he's still working on that. But I don't know if I'm going to hold my breath on this one, guys. I'd be excited to watch it, but I don't know if it's going to happen.
We may talk about it a little more as we dig into this movie, but I know they did make a comic where he said the entirety of what he had written was actually in the comic. So maybe this is something where, he'll actually have shot all this with Tim Roth and everything, and then we will get to see what, people understandably wouldn't sit through a 4-hour movie these days, especially without an intermission. So I have relatively high hopes, but I definitely understand your point too.
It's probably going to be something where we're like, wow, that was really interesting. Definitely good that it was cut.
Right.
Because as a breezy, as we discussed, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was, and please check out that review. We did a whole non-spoiler review of it last week. It's a breezy movie, and I think that any more fat on that probably would have been a little too much.
Take away from the groove.
Yes, but if it's split up, then I think there's a little more room for it to breathe.
Yeah.
Pace-wise. Brian, what else you got in news?
All right, so we've got a couple of movies coming out this week. One that I'm looking forward to is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. So this is based off of Alvin Schwartz's acclaimed children's debatably for children's horror stories, short story collections, and it's produced by Guillermo del Toro, who I think originally may have been directing this, but it kind of, as time went on, got passed off, but he was still, hands-on in production. So this is a movie that seems to be in that Goosebumps vein of taking a lot of stories and throwing them into one overarching narrative. Have you guys heard much about this one?
Yeah. I heard that it's going to be less of like vignettes and more of adapting the stories that are in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and putting them into like a singular narrative format. So it's not going to be exactly like the books in that they're just a bunch of short stories, but we'll have a cast of characters kind of interacting with these different creatures and monsters from the book. Is that what you read?
I know we've talked about this in another episode, but some of the stories from this series and mainly the images have haunted me since my childhood.
Definitely.
So I'm super excited for this, even if it may be for a little bit of a younger age range. I think it can be kind of a good nostalgic throwback, and I'm always down for some horror, even if it's on the childish side. So looking forward to that one a lot. So another one, there's an Amazon documentary that's coming out this Friday as well. And this one is called Free Meek. And I don't know how much you guys know about Meek Mill, but he is a hip hop artist out of Philadelphia. And he was incarcerated at 19 years old for, I believe, a gun and drug charge, which he has ever since then contested. I believe he served a year in prison. And it was funny. I just watched his Colbert interview before this recording, and Colbert says something like, got charged with a short year-long sentence, and he was like, a year's a long time, man. That's not short at all to be sitting in jail.
Between a long year and a short year?
Yeah,
exactly. So it's kind of funny because he immediately was like, oh, okay, yeah, relatively short, kind of a little faux pas there. But yeah, so ever since this time, he was 19 years old. He's 32 now. He's been on probation ever since. And it's been, nearly 20 years at this point. So he started with a 10-year probation. And I don't know a lot about this system, and I don't know a lot about his case, but I'm really interested to get into this because he was talking in his interview about how minor infractions like a U-turn, just interacting with a cop, getting pulled over, can add years onto your probation and essentially keep you in the system for nearly your entire life, So this is going to be an interesting look at the prison system, and especially how it affects even black celebrities to this day. People who have money and can still support their families, but get locked up for minor infractions 10 years after their original offense. So he also just got a label deal with Rock Nation, Jay-Z's label. His label's called Dream Chaser, so things are going really well for him at this point, but his recent incarceration for a probation violation started this hashtag Free Meek movement, and I think, and I can't remember the organization he started after he got out, but he started some sort of organization for prison reform since he got out as well. So I'm really excited about this one. It's on Amazon, and I'll definitely be letting you guys know in what we consumed, how this one turns out.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. I can't imagine living like that. Every time you leave your house, it's like walking on eggshells. Like you said, anything minor could potentially result in something much worse. That's terrible.
Potentially the sign of systemic racism. I don't know why I don't know why I sung that, but definitely not something.
Dramatic effect.
Yeah. It's real, guys.
But that's it for news this week, guys. I am excited to dig into Django.
Awesome. But before we get to that, Brian, you're gilding the horse.
Let's just skip the rest of the episode.
Let's go right to Django. You know what? You're totally right. No, we're going to talk about what we've been consuming. This is where we talk about the various forms of media. There are no rules, just right. Outback Steakhouse, we're still waiting for that sponsorship. This quick hit segment brought to you by Outback Steakhouse. All right, let's jump into it. Chris, you watched Endgame for the 15th time that you've watched it, but this time the directors were talking over it. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Avengers Endgame finally came out on VOD last week.
Thank God. I think it's still in theaters, too.
I think it is still in theaters. That movie, dude, this is exactly what happened with Titanic and Avatar. So, I mean, being the highest grossing film of all time, I feel like this is just part of the ball game,
Only it'll leave theaters once Star Wars hits.
Yeah. So, yeah, I got the opportunity to watch the Avengers Endgame commentary, and it was really interesting, especially considering that it had both the Russo brothers and Marcus and McFeely on the commentary track, so you got to gain a lot of insight from both the directors and the writers of the screenplay. There were a lot of things that I kind of already know that they were talking about, but some of the things on the more interesting side that they mentioned, they talked about Bruce Banner's ascension to Smart Hulk and why they moved it from Infinity War to Endgame, because there was actually supposed to be a scene at the end of Infinity War where the two merged and we actually saw it on screen, but they felt like it kind of messed up the flow a little bit, so they completely got rid of it. Christian, I'm sure you'd appreciate this. The quantum suits that they use in the film, they revealed that they are 100% CG. They do not exist in reality.
Right.
So,
I mentioned that last week.
Did you?
Yeah. The Corridor crew had mentioned that. And that's use of CG not being obvious and being done very well.
Right.
Yeah.
But there were just a lot of interesting tidbits. I definitely recommend watching it if you're a fan of the movie. It was fun.
Yeah, I know I've listened to a lot of the because they did the director's cut, which is a great podcast you should check out, where they talk to directors about their films, and they talk to the Russo brothers, and I've heard Marcus McFeely on podcast, and there's so much love and care that went into this movie, way more than the just cash grab. I mean, they really did put a lot of heart and soul into making this work and making difficult decisions like that. I think that 5-year jump is one of the probably hardest decisions that a writer can make for such a big, blockbuster. And I think it was so impactful. And, the big takeaway from the making of that movie that I've gotten is the write yourself into a corner, where those writers often make it so they don't even know how they're going to write the characters out of situations, which I think always leads to, better conflict and better character development. So I'm excited to check it out. When I enjoyed the Infinity War commentary, and those guys are a lot of fun to listen to. They're very, very smart.
They are. They know what they're doing.
Consummate professionals they are. So very cool. That is Avengers Endgame, now available on VOD. I believe the Blu-ray comes out at the end of the month. Is that correct?
Yeah, later this month.
Get the HD Blu-ray. I might actually get the HD Blu-ray. I'm tempted because I do love that movie, and I think it's real pretty. I think it's a good sign.
And you got the TV to support it.
I do.
Yeah.
Brian, let's talk about what you've been watching. The Farewell. It's a new movie. Is that correct?
It is. So this is actually something I brought up in news probably a month ago when it got its limited release, and I am learning to not announce things a month before, and I'm gonna get better at that, just for the record. But this movie now has a wide release, and this is a movie by director Lulu Wang, and it's something that I say this with most movies, but I would say try not to read a lot about this movie before going into it. I didn't realize until afterwards how personal this story was to the director, and how it's something she's very close to. Let's just say that. And it's a story about a Chinese family who moved to America when their daughter was about 6 or 7 years old, and she grew up largely in America. I believe she's in her mid 20s at this point in the movie, around 25 if I remember correctly, and they get the news that her grandma has a late stage lung cancer. And the family decides to not let her know of this news because as it's presented in this movie, in Chinese culture, if someone, it's kind of inevitable that the end is very close, they decide to let them live their life as they would regardless. And because of this, they have to manufacture a reason for all the family to come see her again before she dies. And so they essentially stage a wedding for one of her younger cousins who's only been dating this girl for like 3 months, which is its own kind of can of worms in terms of social judgment and everything, there's some funny scenes with the grandma like debating like, oh, we should say 6 months, or never mind, let's say a year they've been dating. So this movie, it's got a lot of very funny moments and a lot of really solid dramatic moments. A lot of what's been going on in my life lately, I feel like I was particularly primed to be emotionally vulnerable in this movie. And I think it's really well done. And especially the way it ends, there's a kind of an after credits-ish scene that kind of throws things for a loop in a really interesting way. Awkwafina, this is, I believe, her first leading role, and I think she does an incredible job. It's funny, I was telling my good friend who I saw it with, she kind of reminds me of my cousin a lot in her mannerisms and the way she holds herself, which was just kind of interesting to me. So I could maybe relate to it even more on that level. But I highly recommend this movie. But the tears will be there, but it's got some great laughs as well.
Cool. I'll have to check it out.
Very cool. It's The Farewell, now in wide release. Go see it. Support smaller movies. Very important with your maybe with your AMC A-list. Or breaking news, Regal is getting their own repeatable watching thing. I believe. I hope I'm not getting. I don't have this pulled up, so these details.
Stepping on my news toes here, Christian.
I know. Sorry, I got some news, but so for to support these kind of movies, I as Chris and Brian, in my area of sweet, sunny, the city, beautiful Orlando, there is no AMC's except for near the like parks and stuff, which I am not as close as Chris is to, and so there's a lot of Regals, and I think that they're okay Regals. I've never loved Regals. They've never been my favorite cinema, but they do, to fast food what McDonald's does, right? They definitely serve it up. They've got some better theaters. There's a nice location here in Winter Park with the reclining seats, but they finally are matching the A-list thing. They're going to have their own monthly thing. Now, a couple things is that you've got to sign up for it for a year. You've got to dedicate. You don't have to pay it all at once, but you have to sign basically a contract or user agreement that you're going to pay for it for a year. They've got 3 different classes, and premium. This is a very big difference. If you see like a RDX or whatever they call their enhanced sound and screen, if you see an IMAX 3D, there is a subcharge. But it seems pretty affordable. There's some different tiers that have some different perks. And I'm really excited. I'm going to be very tempted. I will have to make some adjustments in my subscriptions because I can't subscribe to everything. But this is tempting, and it would help me see and be motivated more to go catch films like The Farewell. So might be something to sign up for, and it might be a good deal to check out some more films because I love going to see films, but they're expensive. And
I heard that it's going to be like $18 a month or something. Brian, do you mind if I ask how much you pay for A-list?
It is $21.99 a month, I believe, and that is with no upcharges for IMAX.
You do have to book them in advance, and is there a limit?
So the limit is 3 a week, and it resets on Friday mornings.
I believe Regal has no limits, but there is an upcharge. So it's a give and a take. So you can see, but I don't know why you would. I don't know who has the time, who can afford the $20 a month membership and can see more than 3 films.
Right.
Yeah, it's 12 movies a month is quite a few.
Yeah,
it's a tough call for me because, like you said, Christian, like the number of Regal theaters in the area are bountiful, but they don't support like great projection. Like,
they often have problems with their screens. They don't get the love and care they deserve. They don't have any Dolby. I had called the nicest Regal in the area and was like, "Do you have any Dolby screenings or any plans?" And they were like, "Our Atmos, excuse me." I'm sorry, Dolby Atmos, the newest in like 5.1 sound or whatever, 6. I think it's like 7.1 or whatever it is. And they're like, we have big speakers. I'm like, am I talking to the manager? And they're like, yes. I'm like, you don't know what Atmos is.
I'm pretty sure Dolby Atmos is strictly AMC.
Yeah, well, they have no equivalent. They have nothing to even match it. They're not like, they're RDX, I guess, but it just sounds like they turn the volume up. So
yeah, it's like nothing special. They're just trying to like make their crappy projection better.
Yeah, and I'm all for like comfortable seat. I know we've gone on a little bit tangent, but I'm all for comfortable seating, like just a good like I think it's like 15K, 20K at this point. Like a digital projection is kind of in this really super high format, even if it is not like IMAX or something like that or LIMAX. But the resolutions are definitely not my strong suit. So send your feedback email. But that looks fine, but really the sound quality is really where it's been lacking, like super. Like not only is the projectors could use some work, but like their sound it's like the movies aren't loud. Like I go to a movie theater because I can't crank the volume up in my condo as loud as I'd want, right? So I want them to just blow me away with the sound system, and they don't tend to do that. It feels like they pull their punches. So anyway,
you want to be bleeding from your eardrums.
No, something comfortable for sure, but there's a level of like. I don't want the sound just to be from the front. Like if you just make the sound come from all around, then that adds to, it doesn't necessarily have to be that much louder. It can just be more present, especially with the talkative moviegoers that go to see these Marvel films on opening weekends. Ugh. Crank it up, drown these suckers out. Anyway, so that's a long way of saying hey, I might be able to, if you're not near AMC's, you're near Regals, there may be a way for you to see a lot more films and support your local theaters, your local Regal theater, your local independent Regal theaters, that giant monstrosity of a chain. Anyway, moving on to what I've been doing. Mostly I've been playing in the little spare time that I've had in between everything I'm doing. I have been playing more Warframe. I have a little bit to say about that. I think this is my free-to-play game. I had a $20 PlayStation credit that I had available, and I also spent an extra $20 to get like a pack. And man, like I wanted to show, I had spent, I've probably spent 50 hours on this thing in the last month, and I wanted to show my appreciation to the developers for a game that I was playing for free. And this had a lot of value, and that's even like making this even sweeter. Like there was a lot of like content that was unlocked that didn't feel like it was behind a paywall, but just a little like boost to, the grind that you go through when playing Warframe. So hats off to Digital Extremes, which is the developer. They really put a lot of love in their project, and it's a really cool creative thing. If you haven't played Warframe and you're into looter shooters, if you can get past the initial learning phase, holy cow. It's really great because it's got that Destiny quality of I can get on and play something for 10 minutes and get off easy. Like I can just walk away, and then I can also spend like 6 hours if I wanted to. So it's got this great variable thing. It's good at goal setting. I was actually listening to there's a podcast that David Chen has of the Slash Filmcast. He has something called Culture Irrelevant, and he talks to Dan Trachtenberg, who directed the recent Warframe trailer that kind of sparked my interest into getting back into it. And he talks a lot about why it for creatives, these kind of games are great because they set like achievable goals that are done through monotony. And there's something really satisfying for a creative person where it can feel like, I was just recording the other day and writing music, and I felt like I was bashing my head against the wall, trying to like spark some creativity. And it actually really is cathartic to be able to be like, oh, I want to gather the resources to just unlock this fake thing. And it feels like you accomplished something. And doing that in a healthy way and not spending like 8 hours, obviously, and wasting away the whole day, but being able to like get on with a goal, complete the goal, and feel accomplished is rejuvenating for your creative and your professional like well-being, to feel like you're getting stuff done. So, there's this very psychological thing that I've been trying to tap into with enjoying these types of games in a really healthy way. And I like that this game is made in a way that I can spend 5 minutes on it, or, if I have a couple hours to kill. So that's Warframe. If you haven't got into it and you're into any of that stuff, it's been really good. It's stuck with me. I think it's probably one of the best free-to-play games and examples of showing value through paying money and supporting the developers, but also being a game that you can enjoy and not have to pay a dime. I think it's really cool. It's a really tricky space to navigate, and I think they do it in a really, really good way. So that's Warframe, available on PS4, Xbox, and PC, and Switch now. Guys, in my off time, moving on to other things. I have been...
What's the deal with sandwiches?
I don't know what it is. My lovely girlfriend, Erica, she loves to go to bed to TV. And this is not something I normally do. I used to do it when I was a lot younger, but now it's like silence, bear cave, like just dead silence, and I'll go to bed. And TV and the brightness and the flickering lights kind of bother me. But that being said, she either puts on The Office, which I think it's a great show, but it's definitely not got this personal connection that I have with it, as much as Seinfeld, which I think is the best aging TV show on the planet.
Oh, yeah.
I think in 100 years, you can sit down and watch Seinfeld, and some of the technology obviously is out of date, but the principles behind what drives Seinfeld is so humanly true. I mean, I don't want to equate it to Shakespeare. I don't want to like get that deep, but it really is. I think Jerry Seinfeld is one of like the best. You were talking about Comedians in Cars with Coffee and how he's still doing great work. But it is incredible to revisit Seinfeld and how utterly perfect it dissects the kind of observational comedy and the mundaneness and silliness of humans and conflict. And it constantly surprises me. I'll watch an episode that I've seen before, and still the wit and the way that they're able to get things that are so relatable, even though that film was, where that show was shot in the 90s. It's like, oh yeah, the same things that I go through on a daily basis, and the same things that are very humorous and they're very minor, but also essential to the human experience, are funny. And it's weird looking back on a 90s sitcom that ran and having this much like depth that I can really be like, oh, this is like truth in comedy. I know Brian, you're
Yeah.
a huge fan of Seinfeld. But I was wondering, have you guys revisited it recently? And what's your experience with Seinfeld as you've gotten older?
Oh yeah, dude. Every time I watch it, it gets better and better and better. And we might be like aging ourselves here, but I think that show is timeless. I've heard that the generation after us doesn't exactly feel the same way about Seinfeld, but I love it's one of my favorite sitcoms of all time. Like very easy, like you said, to just throw on in the background, watch an episode, and enjoy whichever episode you're watching.
This is something that it's funny because my dad actually got me into this show, and the first episode of this show he watched was the season finale, which very much the first episode he ever watched. Yeah, caught the season finale, and then from then on we would watch it together nearly ubiquitously. I can't remember, TBS on like Wednesday nights or something would have 2 episodes every week, and we would just always watch this. I feel like we watched nearly every episode of that show, at least the ones that reran. And it's funny because I recently moved in with a new roommate, but my good friend from high school who I was living with before had never seen the show, and he was dating someone who got him into it, and he started watching it from the beginning, and so I ended up watching a bunch of episodes with them. And yeah, this show, like you said, Christian, it feels timeless, and it's a shame if the younger generation isn't into it. I know I had a good friend in college who was a Friends over Seinfeld fan, and I could never get into Friends in the same
Neither
way
could I.
personally. Yeah, and I'm sure growing up watching it with my dad has a huge nostalgia value, but there's something about this show that feels like it does have more simple depth to it than something like a Friends. I don't know how you feel about that, Christian.
Yeah, I'd say Friends definitely hasn't. I grew up with Friends, and I truth be told, watched more Friends than I did Seinfeld as a younger kid. And I watched a lot of Seinfeld. And as it turns out, I feel like I haven't watched Seinfeld in forever. But every time we put on an episode, I'm like, oh, I've seen this episode. So I really
Right.
did watch more than I think. But I watched like all of Friends. And watching it now, I can't help but be like, this show is so perpetually 90s. Like it is such a 90s show. And I think that the younger generation, there's something that about how classic it feels that I think is appealing, whereas Seinfeld I think is a little more universal and a little more timeless. So maybe it's not as like genre specific. Like it doesn't have as much of a 90s mood as Friends does. So I'm thinking that plays into it. But I really think that there's a beautiful thing, and I think Friends is the same way, but there's a beautiful thing in the syndication friendliness of Seinfeld where you could, except for maybe the final episode, which is why it's so hilarious. That's the only one you don't watch. You can put on any random episode, and it makes sense within the context. I feel like every episode informs, very quickly establishes the characters, and it's hard to watch anything with fresh eyes. But I feel like going into any episode of Seinfeld, it's like Kramer's character is established almost every episode. Like every episode, he's running into something as he's coming in and bobbing his head. And you immediately get a sense of the character. Like he's unhinged in every way. And George Costanza, like his body language, like those characters are so uniquely different, but I think occupy the space of kind of human neuroses in such an interesting way in their own characters. So it blows my mind how well it still holds up. And I could endlessly, every time it's on, I'm like, can we turn it? Like, I just want to go to bed, but then I'll just watch 2 episodes. And it's totally fine. I want to be like, turn it off, but I can't. Like, guys, Seinfeld's got me wrapped in. So I believe every episode's streaming on Hulu. So throw it on. It's
awesome.
It's never a bad time. Never a bad time. I just want to give some shout out and some love to Seinfeld. The show you can't hate on, no matter how hard you try. Cool. So that's what we've been consuming. Now we're going to go into our weekly poll.
Please don't leave your thoughts on hold. Come on down to a weekly poll. Please don't leave your thoughts on hold. Come on down to a weekly poll.
Welcome back to the Pop-O-Holics weekly poll, guys. We've been talking Tarantino for what seems like ages now, but I don't mind because he's a fantastic director. And last week we had the privilege of seeing, as Christian put it, his penultimate film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I was so stoked about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that I had the audacity to go out and ask our loyal listeners if they thought it was better than Inglourious Basterds. And let me just say, it's been a very lonely week for old Chris here. Because it turns out I'm the only one that liked Once Upon a Time in Hollywood more than Inglourious Basterds. And that's not to say that I think Inglourious Basterds is a bad movie. Both of those films for me are neck and neck. But our loyal listeners have spoken, and they have decided that 91% of them, to my 9, prefer Inglourious Basterds to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. How do you guys feel about these two films? We talked about it a little last week. I know, Christian, you said you're kind of right on the fence. Like the movies could potentially switch slots in your favorite Tarantino films on any given day. A week out, do you still feel the same way? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this was a tough one. I had commented that it was way too soon to make this call. And I believe with Tarantino movies, you find a lot with age. And I think Inglourious Basterds has just gotten... It was awesome when I saw it, but it was still like, I don't know if it's my favorite. And now it's like, I think it might be my favorite. And we'll get to our rankings at the end of this entire experience. We're going to have a big rank off for all 9 Tarantino films. But going back to the question at hand... yeah, I mean, Inglourious Basterds, I just remember such a great initial viewing and an even better second revisit that we had. And I saw Once Upon a Time twice, and I do love that movie, and it's like choosing between two children. So it's tough, but I think Inglourious Basterds, to me, is more of a crowd pleaser in a totally non-negative way. I can see that as being a greater work because I think Once Upon a Time appeals more to me, and I think for selfish reasons, I like that kind of movie better narcissistically, but I think Inglourious Basterds is the greater work. So it was really hard, and I was dancing. I had my cursor going back and forth, and I wanted to. The only reason I answered is just to see the results. So I had
you couldn't join old Chris on the other side of the line, could you?
I'm honestly surprised. You're the only Jewish person on this podcast, and you chose the one that wasn't about Jewish vengeance. So I applaud you. That is just a testament to the Jewish people.
Look, man, I'm all for murdering Hitler all the time, every day. But I was so hyped. I was so jazzed about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I should have listened to you. We asked way too soon.
No, I'm proud of you for making that choice. I couldn't bring myself to it, but I kind of want to dive, maybe we'll do this off podcast, but I really want to dive into the fact that I actually am surprised that you enjoy it more than Inglourious Basterds. That blows my mind. Brian, what are your thoughts?
I gotta side with the listeners on this one. Maybe it'll change with time. Inglourious Basterds, same with you, Christian. I'd seen it twice. I saw it once, the initial viewing, and coming back to it cemented it as, at this point, my hands down favorite.
Hey,
Tarantino.
we can't give away the ratings yet. Listen, we gotta tease it.
I said at this point, in a month when we do the end, things can change. We got a lot of viewing to do.
Yeah.
But Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I really enjoyed this movie, but it's one of the most potentially, I don't want to say problematic Tarantino movies, but watching it this time, at this point, even given, his first two, which have a lot of criticism in some ways, this was the first one that really felt like I'm not sure what he's trying to get across completely. And for all of our opinions and me and Christian arguing about Bruce Lee, you guys can check out last week's episode for sure. But this one I came away, and I definitely am going to see it again with another friend before it is out of theaters. But yeah, as good as this movie was, I came away uncertain of and I don't have to agree with every director whose movies I see, but this one, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way in an interesting way. And because of that, I got to go with Basterds.
That's fine, Brian. We don't have to be friends anymore. So
I can totally, I've heard a lot of interesting things, and I'd love to have maybe a bonus little conversation, and maybe throw in our previous conversation we had at the end of the last podcast, because I still have that, about the Bruce Lee scene and Brad Pitt and his wife. I don't feel like we went into that as much on the actual show. And I'd love to revisit it, because I've heard some really interesting opinions, and certainly I can't change the way that the movie made you feel about stuff. But it definitely definitely is problematic, but I think in a very purposeful way. And we'd love to hear what you guys think about those two things. And maybe we'll bring, if we get enough responses, maybe we'll do a little bonus conversation about the controversy there. So you can always email us about any suggestions you have for the show, what you think about the show, comments on how you think Bruce Lee was represented. Still looking for them Bruce Lee heads out there. You can email us at popholicscast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on the Facebook where you can vote on our weekly poll, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Also, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate it. It helps the podcast go along further. We really are trying to grow the audience just slightly more before we start going into the Patreon, high fives all around, and then just beg for any financial help for making the show. But we're going to make the show better until we get to that point. That's the goal. We want to make the show as good as we can for you. So any way you can help do that, please email us and let us know. When we get back, we're going to be talking about Django Unchained. I'm very excited, boys. We'll be right back on Pop-O-Holics.
Do you know what a bounty hunter is?
You kill people. And they give you a reward?
Better they are, bigger the reward.
I'm looking for the Riddle brothers. However, I don't know what they look like, but you do. They called my wife. They sold her. But I don't know who to.
Calvin Candy. That's the repellent gentleman who owns her.
Broomhilda is my property, and I can choose to do with my property whatever I so desire.
Help me find the Riddle brothers, and I'll take you to rescue your wife.
Let's get to it.
My name is Dr.
That is from the trailer of Django Unchained, 2012, written and directed by Quentin Tarantino. With a budget of $100 million, it grossed $425.4 million, and it stars, like every Tarantino movie, Jamie Foxx, Christoph Waltz, Leonardo DiCaprio, Kerry Washington, Samuel L. Jackson, Walton Goggins, Dennis Christopher, James Remar, so many other ones. Are there any other big ones that come out? Don Johnson's in this movie. So many people. Man, this is going to be an interesting one to talk about. We're going to talk about our first viewing versus our most recent take, talk about the overall thoughts on the film. We're going to talk about the N-word, which is going to be great with 3 white dudes talking about it, so that might be problematic. But Tarantino made the film, so it'll all wash out. It'll be fine. We're going to talk about style versus substance and kind of those are going to lead into some of my opinions on the movie, and comparing the film to Tarantino's other works. But let's start off with talking about our first viewing versus our most recent. I know that I have a very interesting story on my first viewing of this, but I'd like to hear from you guys. Tell me about it. I imagine you guys saw it in the theaters?
I did. Yeah. The first time I saw Django Unchained was in the theaters, probably at Waterford Lakes or something, one of those old theaters we had around us when we were in
Local
college,
references.
Christian.
Our podcast listeners from
I know,
all around
it's
the country and the
great. They're
world
loving it.
love the local references. Did you
Loving
take
it.
the 408? You took the 408. You got on it.
Yeah.
Probably Goldenrod back in the day. Yeah, took the 408.
Onto Alafaya,
Yeah, onto
into
Alpha,
Waterford
yeah.
Lakes.
Yeah, and you had the tolls, man. That $1.25, man. Son of a bitches. Go ahead.
Inside Orlando podcast.
I'm sure I was pretty confident that I saw this with you, Christian, but I may have seen it with some of our other friends from college, because I definitely went with other people in our social circle. But I remember being really excited to see this movie initially, and then walking out of the theater and just not being impressed, not being blown away by it. I was kind of, what's the right way to say this? I didn't like the overuse of the N-word initially. And it just kind of threw off the whole movie for me. I wasn't able to see it for what it was. So inevitably, I never revisited this film until today when I rewatched it for the podcast. And let me just say, I've experienced a total 180.
Oh, you Guardians Volume 2'd it.
I Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 this movie. This is one of my favorite Quentin Tarantino films now.
Wow.
Because it's like
Okay.
if you take the gratuitous use of the N-word out of the movie, this is like a quintessential hero's journey. It's like an origin story for a superhero, a gunslinger. Django is such a badass. Christoph Waltz does such a great job playing like his mentor / sidekick. You feel for their relationship, and you feel for his relationship with Brunhilde. Like, all around, great movie.
This was the first Tarantino movie I saw in an actual theater. So I saw a showing of Inglourious Basterds for free when I was in college at the Student Union. And from that point forward, I've seen everything, which at this point is only 3 films. But yes, this is my first actual in-theater experience with Tarantino. And I really liked this movie. I really don't remember having any strong opinions about the use of the N-word in it. But it's... for some reason, I hadn't come back to it until this viewing either. So it's been a good while, and I feel like I definitely appreciate this movie even more than I did the first time. What's really stuck with me was the hyperviolence in this, and obviously there's some of it that is purposefully cartoonish, and I think that's contrasted so well with the absolutely atrocious and much more realistic, I'd argue, violence that's portrayed in terms of the actual slaves and some of the scenes that we'll get into later. The hero's journey, I was not thinking about movies like this back then, but I definitely agree. This feels like a true origin story that justifiably could have, the comic book, which it did, and any number of sequels. Like, this is a character who I'd love to follow. This is such a solid story. And yeah, Jamie Foxx is killing it. He does a great job, and it's kind of really interesting to hear some of what he said about working with Tarantino and where he was starting mentally, and where Tarantino kind of had to break him down is not the right word, but just to kind of get in the mindset of really being that character in that time period. And I think this cuts to the core of what people's problems with Tarantino is, and I'm really excited to talk about all that with you guys. But because of that, I mean, he's doing exactly what he's trying to do here. So if you see this, I think this is where you know if you love or you hate Tarantino at his core.
Yeah, he's definitely not by making this movie, he isn't surprising anybody. If you've seen other Tarantino films, this isn't out of left field by any means.
I think he's surprising people that are not familiar with his work, which kind of goes into my first viewing. So I've told the story before, so I'll be brief with you guys. I'll try to just hit the main points. But I was, as Brian has mentioned on the show before, I was kind of really into film as a young kid and really diving into a lot of indie artists. And Tarantino's one of those that's like indie, darling. He just made these very interesting films that were also very successful, just kind of that perfect mix of originality, yet but pleasing to a pretty good wide general audience. And so this is like the perfect kind of artist to show other people. I find that if someone, because Tarantino gives a lot of leeway in his films for accessibility, I feel like he's a great introduction to what you can do different with films, as opposed to the gen pop, regular cinema going, right? So this was like a gateway that I wanted to show my dad into. Inglourious Basterds was the previous film to this, was maybe one of Tarantino's best films. Super hyped on it, and I just wanted to bring my dad is a lover of like old 80s action films, and I feel like my dad has a pretty good sense, and I'm very, very close to my dad, so I wanted to have this experience of seeing a Tarantino film with him for the first time and us experiencing it together. And I knew the subject matter of Django, but I still was, I was like, it's Tarantino. I just trust. He could have literally said, I'm making a film about Mrs. Buttersworth, or I'm making it about the Trix Rabbit, and I'd still be like opening day ready to see it. I know he's going to do something interesting. So I convinced my dad to go see it.
I'd watch both of those.
I convinced my dad to go see it, and I go see it in one of my favorite AMC theaters in Tampa. And me and my dad go, and for the listening audience who doesn't know, my parents are rather conservative. I came from a conservative background, but being in college, obviously trended towards more liberal. So this was also a way for me to show my dad, like, hey, like, let's see a movie that may challenge your conservative perspectives on the history of America. Well, this was a daunting task because the theater that we went to was packed, sold out. I want to say sold out in a very large main screening at this AMC theater, over 200 people. And me and my dad were, I kid you not, the only white people in the audience. and anybody that's of, everybody is of a certain ethnicity, right? And we've all been in circumstances where we've gone in and you're the only person of that ethnicity. That is just something that happens in America. It's one of the things that really is beautiful about America is our diversity. And when you clash with kind of the elements where you're like, oh, this film probably isn't 100% for us. And obviously the audience is very different. So it was a very, very interesting experience. And I think if it was any other film, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. It would have been just like, oh, we're watching a movie. Oh, we happen to notice this observational. But it is Django Unchained, which is about, brutal elements of slavery that are put on display, just abhorrent behavior and elitism from racial discrimination, a stain on American, culture that was a very, very dark time. And, we can get into the minutia of like slavery and its prominence and the context for what it was in a culture and in history. But it was just one of the most uncomfortable experiences in my entire life. To see people subjugated to that and being like, were we a part of that problem? Like me looking at my dad almost like, did we do that? Is that us? On my
not
dad,
even looking at you, he's nodding his head, staring at the screen.
My dad was sweating bullets. I don't think me or him had ever been put in a situation like that. And I'm sure it's nothing compared to what a lot of the American black experiences with overly cultural, white Hollywood and all that. So it are just what we deserve in that. And I remember at the end of the film, my dad just goes, well, that was interesting. Like, cause it was where, and I love this cause Tarantino has this effect, like, and movies like this have this effect of like, because of the circumstance and the actual viewing experience of going out to this, if we watched this in our home, I'm sure my dad would have been uncomfortable, but not nearly in the way of going out and seeing it with an audience. And I gotta say, it was very unpleasant. And so I have not revisited this movie because honestly, it brings up my dad being stressed out the entire time and my dad feeling bad. Like this movie is funny. And so my dad was like, we were both laughing, but then like, oh no, we can't it was such a, for lack of a better word, a mind to experience this movie because it brings up all this. And I think that all those feelings had prevented me from going back. And for other reasons, like I don't think it's one of Tarantino's strongest overall narratives. And I'll get into the minutia of why I think that is. But that being said, it was one of the most interesting film going experiences. And I think I honestly think helped mature both me and my dad in a lot of really healthy ways, but also uncomfortable ways. It's like throwing up, it's like where throwing up is necessary. Your body's trying to get rid of something bad, but you don't want to revisit it, but it's good that it happened. I don't want to compare this film to like the complete excruciating experience of vomiting or anything like that, but it was one of those really important. Not sure if I want to go back there. But that being said, that's laying a lot of groundwork for my revisit. I definitely held it in a very weird spot. And I would say that it definitely, Chris, I don't know if I fully 180'd on the film as far as overall filmically how it works. I think it has gone up, though. I think that in retrospect and being removed a little bit and being able to see it, especially in the greater context of all the work we've seen, I definitely think it's elevating, but I'll stop rambling because I've gone on a lot about this. So let's move into overall thoughts. I want to hear some more of your thoughts on the overall film, having the two looks. I know, Chris, you've 180 on it, but if you can go into more detail, where is this movie, like what is really standing out to you in this revisit and what really elevates it to one of your favorite Tarantino films?
I think the overall structure of the narrative, like from what we've seen in his past films, like he jumps around in time a lot. We have seen him play ball a little more generically in his films by just making a linear story. And this is one of those more linear stories that he tells. There are a couple of flashbacks, but they're not structured in the same way that he tends to jump around with time in his other films. But like I said, this is like a quintessential hero's journey tale. And the way in which he even parallels it with that old German folktale, that old German fairy tale that he even mentions in the film about Brunhilde. It's a retelling of that with a different culture and a different time period. And before, I just wasn't seeing any of that. I couldn't get past some of the gruesome imagery in the film, or like I said, the gratuitous use of the N-word, those things were preventing me from like enjoying the actual narrative of the piece. But this time around, knowing what I was going into, I just decided to kind of accept those things and focus more on characters. Like his villains in this film are true villains, comic book villains. And it was just a much more enjoyable ride over the course of the entire thing. You get to see Django grow from being a slave to being a superhero, man. Like he even has his superhero outfit at the end of the film. And like Brian said, I would watch many sequels with this character, the way that he's developed him and structured this initial narrative.
I think something that I didn't appreciate the first time going through this movie, I think it's one of the most beautifully scenic movies of anything Tarantino's ever done. The way music is used here feels completely different than a lot of the previous films and even his more recent stuff. It feels like he just takes the time to let the movie breathe. I don't know if there's a word of dialogue when there's music on screen. And it just allows these transitional interludes of gorgeous Western backdrop. And I think it provides this really interesting context of this beauty contrasted with the atrocity of how America was back then. So it's really blending like what is shown off in old Westerns, but also what's kind of hidden in a lot of the old Westerns, that the stuff that they didn't talk about, what was going on in the times. And with that being said, Tarantino has talked a lot about how Westerns do a great job of it really expressing the time period that they're made in. And I think this movie came out in 2012, right?
2012. Mm-hmm.
So 2012, like this is a time when, you know, we are obviously decently removed from slavery as an institution. Jim Crow proceeded long after that. But, you know, in 2012, we're nearly 60 years past the civil rights movement. And it's still something that it felt like I hadn't been presented with even this level of depiction of the grotesque nature of what was truly happening back then. Yeah. And it felt so different to, like, you know, I've seen a Schindler's List and I've seen other movies that depicted this other atrocity that happened across the world that I feel like has been embodied on screen in a way that I had never seen slavery depicted in this way. You know, I saw movies like Glory back in the day, which I haven't revisited. I remember liking it growing up, but even that one, I can't say that it's nearly on this level of just visceral understanding of what the slave trade was and the dehumanizing nature of it. So just for that in itself, I feel like this movie, it opened my eyes in a lot of ways. With that being said, Christian, like you said, this movie is hilarious as well. And it's hard to believe that you can have these two things work together. And Christoph Waltz's character, I think what I didn't realize the first time through, and what became really clear this time, is how much he is this kind of European white man who thinks he understands what slave owners are and who these people are, but you quickly learn that Django has such a deeper understanding of what the hatred means and how
he's lived it.
Exactly, and how to reflect that back to them when he's got to play a character. And I'm rambling at this point, but that level, it really didn't sit with me with the violence and what was happening on screen the first time through. So this viewing really helped that message get driven home and really made it a deeper experience for me.
That's really interesting to say that. Now that you say that, it makes total sense. And this will play into like the depth of the movie, which I think is relatively shallow for a Tarantino film. This film, and we'll talk about later, it feels way more style over substance. Like it deals with one meaty core issue, and that is the meaty core issue throughout the entirety. There's no subtext. It's just the text of the, of the atrocities of slavery. But it's really interesting. It is almost like Christoph Waltz character is almost like a proxy for someone in our current time period who may look back and go like, oh, I understand what it was. It was, it was just the time. It was just what people are doing. And he's trying to make a difference, and he clearly is against it as a human rights violation. But he also approaches it from a very analytical point of view, where Jamie Foxx's character obviously understands it on the more brutal, no, they claim their dominance and ownership over other humans. And I understand that to a fault, whereas Christoph Waltz is like, it's just a business arrangement. And to the people that have suffered under slavery, it is much, much more than that. It is a brutal violation of their inalienable human rights, right? So I think that's really interesting that you point that out. I think if I was to go to my overall thoughts, I think there's more depth to this movie than I'd first thought. And it obviously, I think I was able to, in the context of watching it in my home, I was able to laugh a little bit more about how silly and ridiculous it is. But it is interesting, the juxtaposition between the violence that Django has for and Christoph Waltz against the bounties that they hunt, or the slave owners or people associated with all the aspects of the different antagonists that you have, is that it's very cartoony. But any of the violence between against slaves or in the Mandingo fight, that's brutal and not stylized. It is very much like, it's weird. Yeah. It's very subtle. Because there is a difference in the type of violence being portrayed on screen. And I think this is something that Tarantino doesn't get enough credit for, which is when he's like shooting the injustice violence. It is like, it feels authentic and it feels brutal and it feels wrong. Whereas the stylized cartoony violence of Django's vengeance and the characters we wish to see succeed is very much silly. And it's interesting how the two are kind of put between each other. So I think on second viewing, that was especially apparent of like, oh, he's delineating kind of fantastical violence versus, no, this is real stuff that happened, and this is why it affected our characters and why they were motivated to do what they did. So I think kind of to summate overall thoughts is that this movie is complicated to watch. And I think that's by design. I don't think it's easy to make, even as pulpy as it is on the surface and fun, and like you said, a superhero origin story. It is all those things, but it's also inherently really complicated. And I think the big controversy that surrounded this film when it came out, from watching a lot of stuff, was Tarantino's use of the N-word. He famously has a count. It's 109 that are dropped. And you have mostly said by white characters and white actors. And so, how do we feel? Maybe in the context of when we saw it, how do we feel now? Again, we are three, white individuals talking about this. So obviously we are speaking from our own perspectives of what we've seen from friends and colleagues and stuff. So obviously we're not going to get the whole width of this, and this is a very complicated issue. We don't want to speak lightly of it. I know I say a lot of stupid. So if I say something dumb, feel free to write in, correct me. But we are going to be discussing this in the context of Tarantino's film, because it is very, very important to it. But kind of what has struck you about his use and his Tarantino's defense of it, and kind of the context of it within the story?
I don't think I have a whole lot to say about this particular thing, considering, obviously, like you just said, we're three white males, so there are some cultural biases here. I see what Tarantino's argument was, justifying his again, I'm going to say it, his gratuitous use of this word.
You say gratuitous use. See, that's kind of indicting the use of it. So I'm kind of getting at your feelings towards it if you say gratuitous use.
No, I've said it multiple times, and I'm building to my thesis here, and that is I think he argues for the use of this word because it's a period piece. Because of the time period that it's taking place in, he feels as though he's justified to use this word liberally as much as he wants. I argue that I think he could have made the same film and shown the same visuals, probably with using this word less or not at all. I don't think it's the word that necessarily is impactful in the film, but the violence that is more impactful. So
I don't know, man. I don't think if it didn't have the N-word, I wouldn't have felt the way I did with my dad in the theater. I think that every time that word was said, me and my father felt it more like we felt it as a more of a dig, and like, oh, that's not, and that's weird to turn the tables on us feeling the lack of compassion and atrocity in that word. You know what I'm saying? It almost conveyed that feeling. To like, I would never compare myself to having the experience of African American in the United States, but I will say that like if there's any time that you could flip that word on someone and be like, oh, wait, that's not okay, right? And that's a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you
Quentin Tarantino, that's okay. Quentin Tarantino's no stranger to using these racial slurs. We've seen him use multiple racial slurs in all the movies that we've watched from him. My stance is that probably is more in line with Spike Lee's stance, which is like, it's not your word, man. Like, you don't have the right to say that, especially the number of times you've said it. And yeah, Quentin Tarantino can tend to be like a provocateur sometimes. Brian and I had this conversation a couple of days ago about some of the things that he said in the past, how like kind of like James Gunn, maybe a little worse than James Gunn. He said things that he doesn't necessarily mean, but more so he's saying them to be a provocateur. So like he's using this word because like he feels like he maybe has the right to use it, but I would disagree with that.
I actually feel this is the movie where I feel like, because going back and watching Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, I think I agree with your points there a little more, Chris. There it felt like, okay, these movies can exist without this, even though it's not to the level that it's used here. It felt gratuitous, the slurs. And yes, these are characters that are quote unquote bad guys, but they are the main characters in the movie. You are supposed to sympathize with them on some level. So for them to be throwing these things around, it felt different to me.
Sorry to interrupt you. You also have characters in the film that aren't quote unquote bad guys using the word just as liberally. Christoph Waltz's character says it just as much as, say, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, because it's built into the conversation, the vernacular of the time.
This is kind of on Tarantino's side for this movie. If he had not used this word, I think he is whitewashing the reality of the situation. And as a white audience member in particular, to remember how, like you said, this was the casual use of the word. White people largely did not consider African Americans to be humans, and this was how they put them a step below. They quantify them. They literally think of them as, 3/5 human at some point was in the laws. So I think to see that, and I think it gets a little questionable. And this, as a white guy, obviously, it's hard for me to know if this is troubling for me to laugh at. But Tarantino seems to be like highlighting the inherent ridiculousness of it when Django is, and we haven't done a spoiler bumper here. I'm not sure.
We're a spoiler. This is not a review. So I think in our non-review episodes, understand we're
gotcha.
spoiling.
I'm sorry. But when Django is presented as an equal to Christoph Waltz's character, you see a white man like, oh, how do I tell my slaves to treat this person who is above them but still below me? And then he has to like, who's that kid that works in town? Like, treat him like you treat that guy. And it's just like so inherently absurd and ridiculous. But it does show the reality of the situation at the time. And this kind of, I'm not going to rehash my opinions on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but even at that time period, I feel like some of the main characters probably would have been using this word. Absolutely. And because there are no African-American characters really in the movie, I feel like that was a little bit of a whitewashing of that time period, which is much more recent. Right. So something here, it felt a lot more justified, even though every time Tarantino talks about how he was raised and how he feels like black culture is his culture, it does sit a little funny with me. So I think there's something there. But yeah, Christian, what do you think?
Well, I think a lot of times when we get in these discussions, I think it's always wise to remember that, Spike Lee came out and said like he was against this, right? And he is one, member of that
without
community.
Seeing it, I might add.
Yeah,
right. He hadn't seen
and
the
that's
film.
huge. And honestly, if I was just looking at Spike Lee's filmography, I don't think he's made as many great works as Tarantino, just on a pure director level. And to not see a movie and then claim it, that is his own personal belief. And I don't want to take that away.
Hot takes from the white guys.
Hot take. Spike Lee. What is his most recent movie? Black
Klansman.
Black Klansman.
A lot of that movie's great. So I will say that's one of my newest favorites from him. So he's an acclaimed director, but he has his own opinions and he does not represent all of black culture. And I think we get so wrapped up sometimes in saying like, oh, white culture says this, gay culture says this, trans culture says this. And it's like a lot of people have really nuanced ideas. And to use the N-word in this is a very bold choice. And we can all have our opinions on what we think is right and wrong. Either way, when you're dealing with these topics, it is always like a, especially from our perspective, as we've mentioned, is very limited. But I want to say that like it's going to affect everybody in a different way. I think it's ultimately important that he made this film. That choice, I think, from the experience that I had, was a very wise one. Because, like you said, Brian, it helped enhance the ridiculousness of the pejorative aspects of that word and what it meant. And it made, like I said, reversed the whole concept on me as a white person with my dad going like, stop saying the word, stop saying it. Like, this is not cool. And I think that's inherently super powerful. So, if I was giving my own takes, I think that like you said, it's very interesting because in this, it has great historical context. It makes more sense. In Reservoir Dogs, for instance, when they're in the car and they say it a couple times, it makes you think less of the characters, right? And it has the same aspect here, but it's obviously with it all being centered around slavery and race and the oppression of Africans. It's it's a whole lot more in context with the film. So I think I'd align with your points there, Brian. But I think ultimately, if you're upset about it, like be upset about it, like and more power to you. I would say watch the film, Spike Lee, before you have your opinions. Like. Not to call
we know you're listening, Spike.
Yeah, we know you're listening, Spike. What a weird name, Spike. What kind of name is that?
I will say, just to play devil's advocate here, Do the Right Thing. It has its 30th anniversary this year.
Masterpiece.
And I actually haven't seen it, but I'm hoping I can catch a screening if it comes locally because it's a blind spot for me.
Spike, you peaked with that theoretical mohawk that you have. Bash Spike Lee. No, we might have a Spike Lee, retrospective, which would be very interesting because he's very.
I was thinking about that too, actually.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting. So, Pop-O-Holics, if you want to hear that, hit us up. But yeah, in summation, I don't know if you guys have any more thoughts. I think that it sucks because some of my favorite lines involve that word, and I can't say it. And good for the people that enjoy it, that they feel ownership of that word, that they can share it with their brethren and share it as a fun thing. It makes it harder to like. I want to when we get into like our favorite moments of this film. There's so many great lines that involve it that I can't enjoy in that, and maybe that's part of the point. It's like it's not for me to say it and embrace it and enjoy, and it sounds really gross whenever it's amazing that such great actors like Christoph Waltz and Leonardo DiCaprio had to say it. And I was watching some behind the scenes stuff, which we'll link to in the show notes, a couple of things. And Leonardo DiCaprio being like, not himself saying this was all his co-stars going like, he was not feeling good before the takes. Like he just had never played someone this despicable and saying that. And he had a really hard time. And I think that's like proof to, the importance of it in conveying the villainy and, racial discrimination of it all. And like, it shows like, a good person isn't going to want to go on screen and say that unless it's part of the overall vision. And obviously, Tarantino had the buy-in from all the actors and making the vision come to life. So, guys, do you have any final thoughts? Do you guys have any final thoughts on the N-word?
I think I'm good.
Yeah, me too. Let's move away from this. I put it I felt like it was a thing we needed to talk about.
Definitely.
To the limited scope that we can. But let's go on to style versus substance. Chris, obviously you find this, and Brian, the same. You guys seem like there's a lot of depth in here. I'd love for you to enlighten me. I think on both viewings, I still come away with a little bit, although I think the experience of seeing it is very powerful and deep. I think the context of it is like you said, a very fun origin story. But what's more the substance you can lean to, or do you agree with me that there's maybe a lot more style in this flick?
I think it really depends on how you define depth, Christian. Because I talk about all these strong narrative moments and like quintessential storytelling that's in this film, but I don't consider that stuff like ultra deep. I mean, we've been doing those same things for centuries, right? We just continue retelling these same stories in different ways because they resonate with us as humans and they're powerful tales. So I would agree with you with this particular style versus substance, because I think if Quentin Tarantino was really trying to say something about racism and slavery, he barely scratched the surface in this film and leaned way more into the style of this particular movie. He wanted to shoot it more like a spaghetti western. He was more focused on how he was shooting it, what it was going to look like, and then there was a very shallow message within the film. I definitely think he leaned more toward how he wanted to look, without a doubt, because it looks like a spaghetti western, a cowboy serial from the moment it starts.
Sure. Brian?
So I think I said it a little earlier. I think I more and more realize the depth of this movie, and I've only seen it twice at this point, but the way Christoph Waltz's character is desensitized to a version of humanity in his own way, and how he's coming to terms with that over the course of the movie as well. I think he's really critiquing these westerns that he loves, because the bounty hunter is such a pivotal character in these sorts of stories. And I think the line is something like, you know, in Django Unchained itself, they say something like slavery is the selling of lives and bounty hunters is the selling of corpses, you know. So, and it really hit me this time how Django still has a level of humanity, even given everything he's gone through, that Christoph Waltz has completely shirked off at some point, where he's just able to, without question, kill someone in front of their son. And one of my favorite scenes in this movie is when we see Django hesitate there. And because, you know, he has this love for his wife where he'll do anything to get back to her, so invariably he goes through with it. But he's got these deep emotions about this. And we see Waltz's character, you know, when actually faced with the not just the transactional aspects of slavery, but the Mandingo fighting. He has PTSD like flashbacks to seeing a man get torn apart by dogs, and something that when Leonardo DiCaprio's character, you know, even comments, he's like, he looks a little green around the gills for someone who's getting into Mandingo fighting, and he's like, he's just never seen a man torn apart by dogs before. He's not used to Americans or something like that. And I think there's such a deep, there is something that's really deep about how someone can still be a good person in the face of all this hatred and in the face of all of this atrocious violence against an entire group of people that's completely senseless. And, you know, it's weird having Tarantino be the person to present this, and I'm sure it's been done elsewhere, so I don't want to make him seem like some messianic figure, you know. Right. But it was something that this time around it really hit me how Christoph Waltz's growth was something that I didn't really see the first time through to a large degree. And, you know, I think him bringing up that Alexandre Dumas was a black man to Leonardo DiCaprio's character was just like, you know, he's like, okay, I'm getting my shot in now that the jig is up. So, yeah, I think there is depth to this, but I do agree that overall it is kind of a straightforward narrative piece on some level. Something I always like to bring up, what I feel is like the classic Tarantino moments when Christoph Waltz's character tells Django to become this character. Like, they're just talking about characters within a movie. He's letting him pick out his outfit. It's like, be this person, embody this character. And Chris, you brought it up earlier, the German story. He's showing you the narrative within the narrative, and it helps you to see the growth of the characters and what everyone's really fighting for. And Waltz, you know, is surprised himself. And I love that you can do these kind of things within the context of a movie and make it feel natural to some degree. You know, it is also very sad when it's the first time seemingly that Django's ever been able to choose his own clothes. You know, so it's like he's still doing his Tarantino thing, but also highlighting this, you know, this horrific life that Django has been forced to lead in the United States. So, yeah, there's just so much to this. Talking about phrenology and really showing people how there was this quote-unquote scientific justification for the dehumanization of African people.
Yeah,
that's
oh my
so,
God. What a
so
horrible
atrocious.
monologue.
And it's just like he is fully invested. He fully believes what he's saying, and it's filthy. It's sick. And I think I'm not going to get too political right now, but a lot of historical race science, even into the modern age, is still a lot of times used in this way, even if it's not as on its face as explicitly racist. A lot of people will manipulate information and interpret it in certain ways to downplay other groups of people. So there's really a lot to dig into here. And just on top of that, when Rick Ross comes on and as Django is just riding across the scene like with the whole group, I was like, this is one of the most badass things I've ever seen in my entire life.
The Black Dolphin song?
I think it's Black Bosses.
Oh, it's Black Dolphins. I thought he was saying dolphins. Oh my God.
I don't think it's Black Dolphins.
Black Dolphins.
I thought it was Black Dolphins. It's not dolphins. I was really confused by that. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not Black Dolphins.
I don't believe so.
I want to bring up that this is the first Quentin Tarantino movie in which none of the music is diegetic.
Yes.
It's all...
That is not true. You're wrong, Chris. I'm so sorry.
Where?
What?
Name it. Name the scene.
Beethoven, when the little girl is playing
that's
Beethoven
true.
on the
That's
harp.
true.
And yes, I'm so sorry.
It's at the end.
95%.
Most of the tracks, in fact, are non-diegetic. You're right, but
Yeah.
that moment stuck out to me because it's a very stop and start. It's a very staccato version of that, where it's like it just causes anxiety because the way that she's playing is. Like it's very annoying to listen to the way she's playing that song. So I was completely, Christoph Waltz is completely justified in being like, stop playing Beethoven that way.
So that's interesting you took it that way, because I did notice the stop and start. And Chris, I don't want to interrupt if you had more to say.
No, that's all I wanted to reveal. Yeah.
Okay, so
It's
definitely
basically the
something
most
that I noticed
pretentious
as
way
well.
that you could. It's the most pretentious reading of that song, because that is in fact like kind of the way that it's always performed, but it is exaggerated to the nth degree and trying to be more dramatic than it actually is. Anyway, as far as what I know, I'm not a classical musical historian, but I believe that is an obnoxious way to play that song.
I had my I'm blanking on the word. What is this thing that I'm doing with my
Metronome.
finger? I had my metronome going, and she was definitely off tempo. So,
No, and that piece is meant to be played with hesitation, like no doubt.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
but not to that that degree. It's comical the way that piece is played.
yeah, and it was interesting because that scene and the way he cuts her off, it actually made me think of Clockwork Orange, when you have Alex's character having someone that he very much admires, also Beethoven, a different piece, but played over this atrocious violence that he's starting to actually realize how horrific it is. And this is when Walt is also like really realizing the society he's surrounded by, and he does not want this thing he considers beautiful associated with it at all, So I read
this is ostensibly the first time that Christoph Waltz is in the belly of the beast, like that he's gotten this deep in with slavers to where the point where he's like, these people are gross.
Yeah. Candyland. The fact that it was called Candyland too, I imagine this is a fake place, but it was just so weird, like this board game I grew up with, and then associating it with like the infamous, plantation that all the slaves know about.
And there's so much wealth on display and extravagance, and I think that this is why there's like so much in this film, but it's all at base level, and I think that's what maybe frustrates me is that there's not a whole lot I look back and I'm like, oh, I don't get that. Like you pointed out some really interesting things, Brian, and I don't want to take that away. And I think you've gotten a lot out of this film, and it's been really nice to hear your opinions. But it's kind of like, and I don't mind it. It's not that I don't mind it. It's just that, like, for instance, the whole place is extravagantly all the kitchenette sets and garnishes, and the food is opulent, especially for that time, and everything is very, very pristine. It's called Candyland. It's like this place of opulent wealth. All their suits. His sister is very unattractive, but she has just the most beautiful Victorian dress on, but she is like, ugh. And he calls her my beautiful sister, and he's like, and there's something weird going on there for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you see, Leonardo DiCaprio like smile, or you see his teeth and they're rotten, right? It's like, okay, Tarantino, I get it. Like you got all this like finesse on the top, and it's all beautiful and gorgeous, but underneath, it's like the heart of it is rotten to the core. Like thanks, Tarantino, I get it, but it's like I don't hate it. It's just there's not as much as like I look back and go like, oh, this character's motivation, where did this character come from, as much of his other work that I think rightfully so, he just made it like, kind of like the German versus American Jewish front, right? It's like bad guy, good guy. And he's able to work within those contexts and make the hyperviolence make a lot more, be a lot more justified because of how easy it is to be like, ugh, gross.
Right.
Like slavers are bad.
And yeah, on that note, it's kind of funny. Like I watched this panel of all the actors. They did. I don't know where it was at. It looked like it was in some hotel conference room or something. But Walton Goggins was kind of talking about how he was getting into character and explaining the backstory to his character. How he's like, I was a poor white man, and in this society, one of the few ways if you weren't born rich is you go work on a plantation. You could work your way up, and this and that. And he's kind of like bringing this trying to bring this humanity into the character. And Samuel L. Jackson just like puts his arm around him. He's like, and that all really came across too. It was freaking hilarious.
That is really funny.
I was dying. And we haven't touched on it at all, but Jonah Hill and the pseudo KKK, and the way they were just like completely useless, ignorant assholes was amazing. And seeing them get blown up, I was so in for it, and I thought that was a nice little icing on the cake.
Well, last week I'd mentioned that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood reminded me of playing Grand Theft Auto. And obviously you can easy point A to B, Red Dead Redemption. I talked about it incessantly in our first year of doing this podcast. I was playing, Red Dead had come out and I was playing it. But really, you can see where the inspiration from Rockstar comes. Like, this movie came out during the development of that game. And one of the funny bits in that game and how they deal with racism in that time period is not only do they have a black character who faces and a couple black characters that face oppression, and you see that and you see the way they're treated, and it's not great, and all the stuff that this movie does. But also, when you run into the KKK, if you run into the KKK, like, because this game, like Red Dead Redemption is like open world, you can just roam around on a horse. Sometimes at night you can run past a KKK assembly. And what happens is, like, my friend who played the game, when he went through, he immediately just murked the KKK. He was like, nope, done. He Django'd the fuck out of them. But if you actually sit and watch them, they always end up killing themselves. And that's the kind of tone that they're hitting with Django. Like they'll be putting up a cross and like it'll be on fire and the cross will fall over and they'll all burn to death. Like you don't even have to kill them. They eliminate themselves by stupidity. And this film plays along with the same kind of like, no, let's just show them as complete morons. Like, why would you ride around in these stupid masks? It makes no sense. Someone had to cut holes. Like the fact that Tarantino went to like somebody's wife, like stayed up all night to poke holes in this mask, and like they're obviously no one could see out of them. Like, it is such an inherently stupid premise, and I love being able to the fact that he takes the piss out of what they use. It's like making a mockery. They use those masks to be like, very scary, and it's a fear tactic, and to take the sting away from that completely and be like, no, these masks are stupid.
And this is something that Quentin Tarantino loves doing. We saw it in his alternate history take in Inglourious Basterds with how he murdered Hitler. We saw it more recently in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with the way he handled the Manson family at the end of that. He loves, like you said, taking the piss out of these like villains throughout history, people who have mistreated other people.
It's weird how this movie is somehow more relevant now than it was. It's weird to look back on like 2012, right, when this came out. And I would say in the context of American culture, we were in our nearing the end of the first term of the Obama presidency, first black president, going into swift re-election of Mr. Obama. And it was this time period where a lot of people were like making this excuse that like, oh, we don't carry the burden of this racism anymore. Look at our president. He's black. I voted for Obama. That whole thing that we've discussed, And so watching it now when we have, the polarizing president that we do, and where race relations are higher than they've been in the past, like our adulthood. It is crazy how more poignant this film is on kind of it's obviously a comical representation of the dehumanizing, but it is in fact more powerful because it is based off real historical events.
Yeah.
That it is more like it feels more, it is more real. It's not even that it feels more real, but it's able to use this context to really show you the extremes of racial thinking. And like you said, Brian, the little pokes and prods that I think a lot of people on certain spectrums of thinking can have these, like, you know, in their mind, seemingly non-racist biased that are in fact, you know, this is the extreme version of all those small things, like all those small, you know, what the left will frequently call microaggressions, which, you know, is a complicated word, but I think very, very powerful. Like these tiny things that you do, the slight, like, you know, IQ test and you know, downplaying. Like I know one really powerful thing for me in watching this film, especially growing up in like a white household, is like there was this. This is gonna sound really gross, and I'm sorry to any of our black listeners. Like this is a terrible thing that like white people would say. I swear to God, there were teachers that I had in growing up that said not all slave owners were bad. Like it was literally a thing of like, oh no, they treated them humanely. And I think there is something to, like, in the context of slavery throughout all of history, not even American slavery, there is something to, I guess, you're a better ethical person if slavery is a thing and you're nice to your slaves. Great, good on you. You're a real hero, right? And I think this movie even condemns that because his sister is like pretty nice to all like she is way more like, don't, you know, cover up her, you know, when they're showing her back, she's like, no one wants to see that, and like, and she's very nice, but at the end she's still part of the problem. Like Django goes,
I don't read that as being nice.
Right? No. And
she was disgusted, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that, like, I think there's a lot of players in this time period, and this movie does not nearly go over this nuance as much, but I think there is a level of, like, if you're at least, like, a moral person within this immoral system, you are somehow more moral. And I feel like this movie even condemns that, which I think is proper, which is like, no, if you're, like, slightly for slavery, you're still for slavery. Like, even if you're like,
right.
Oh, I'll be, you know, and I think that, I don't know if that's something that's really pronounced in this film, but I thought of like that one. I just thought like, oh, out of all the people like treating slaves, like she's at least like somewhat humane, but that doesn't justify it in any way. And the fact that he's like, now say goodbye to Mrs. Candy or whatever he says. And then
the way she flies off.
And again, I don't know if this is on purpose, but it is that, like, as comical as it is kind of this like, at least for me, in my perspective, it is a indication of like, you are just as bad. See you later. Like, even though this gunshot is going to hit you from a weird angle and it shouldn't do this to you, in the context of this film, you still deserve the full justice of a like straight to the face shotgun blast back, you know,
with
like,
Tupac music banging in the background, which is fucking incredible as well. I apologize for my language, but something that I didn't think about the first time, and okay, I'm just gonna say it. This may be a reach, but Christoph Waltz's character is literally named Dr. King. And is there something weird about that, where he's like this white guy who's kind of saves Django? Is named Dr. King.
I never considered that.
I didn't think about it until
he's a dentist.
Well, I don't think MLK was a dentist, but
I don't even know if. I mean, that's interesting that you bring that up, but I don't even know if Quentin Tarantino considered that. Dr. King Schultz.
Probably not. It's just something that this time I was just like, really, Dr. King? Like, is he trying to say something here? Probably not, like you said. But it was something where I was just like, okay, if someone made this argument, it'd probably be hard to go against it with classic, like, white savior narratives.
Yeah, and Django's the Malcolm X. So it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear cut.
Oh my god,
pretty straightforward, Brian. I don't know why you didn't see the analogy.
All right.
In closing, how do we, we're not ranking the films yet. That's going to come in a later episode. How do we think this stacks up? Where do we put this in the pantheon of Tarantino work? What is it most like? And kind of, how do we feel it fits in kind of, this is his second half of his career. How would you compare it to his other works?
I would put this up there with some of his better work, some of his best work. Granted, he only has 9 films over the course of a 30-year career, but I would rank this as one of his better movies. And as far as comparing this to other films in his filmography, I actually think, I mean, last week I said that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is one of his sweeter films. He rarely does that. But I don't think Django Unchained is like any of his other films at all. I don't know about you guys.
No, yeah, I think there's something to be said for that, you know? I think all of Tarantino's stuff is very bold, but this one seems like potentially the most bold thing he's put on film, and it's probably why it's so contentious with audiences. But in terms of ranking it, I'd say it's probably gonna end up being top third for me, middle to top third. I really gotta see where the rest of this plays out. But in terms of most comparable, you know, the alternate history coming after Basterds, it seemed like he was in this mind state, and he even said that both these stories had kind of been working around in his brain for a long time. So yeah, I think that's the closest. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood doesn't feel on the same level as those two for me. I don't know if you guys agree on that, but it's not just about the sweetness, although the love story element I think does drive this movie to a large degree, which does work really well. And we didn't say anything about Kerry Washington's performance, which is obviously great as well. Although she doesn't get a lot of screen time. But the way language is used with her, and how, you know, because she speaks German, this is kind of a driving part of it. And Tarantino's always doing this language stuff with Christoph Waltz. I appreciated that. But yeah, in terms of, I'd say it's closest to Basterds. But yeah, it's hard to really compare this one to other ones outside of, you know, just the violent aspects in itself. But even the way that there is the clearly cartoony violence versus the clearly serious and grounded violence. I think this is where it's at its most heightened.
I think that this is the best. I think this is one of the most interesting uses of Sam Jackson. I think this is just another clear, God. Like, yeah, no, we didn't even talk about it, but
it's great.
You know, Sam Jackson is in a lot of his work, and I think that even rewatching it the second time going through, I think most of the best parts of this movie are in the third act. Once Django becomes more of a character, because I do feel like, just like on the origin story argument, I think that Django really, and this is kind of reflective, the Jamie Foxx didn't get an Oscar or anything for this. And I think part of it's because he doesn't really come into his own until like the very third act. And I think you see Django becoming a hero. You have Leo, who's just deliciously evil and awful, and Sam Jackson, who's conniving. And so I think it really is just all coming together in the third act. I think this is one of the strongest third acts in all of Tarantino's works. Like, I think that's where it really holds up the best. And just to clear, I think in parallel with all of his stuff, the way he's like, Sam Jackson isn't in anything as amazing as when he's with Tarantino, right? And it's a testament to the work and the communication between the writer, director, actor relationship. I heard a really interesting thing. I was listening to a roundtable that I'll link in the show notes with Tarantino, Ridley Scott, and Danny Boyle, and a bunch of other really talented directors. And one thing that Tarantino said that I think has been clear throughout all his work is he learned something from Harvey Keitel really early on in the career. This blew me away, is that when Harvey Keitel was talking about how to deal with actors, he said, when you're a director and you write a script and you're coming in for your first reading, don't tell the actor how to do anything. They've already read your material and they've envisioned the character in their head, and they're actors, so they know how to bring characters to life. It's what they do. You put the story together, they bring the characters to life. Do not give them any guidance. Do not tell them what you envision the character. Let them do the line reading and go from there. Because it is a lot easier to give recommendations. You give recommendations in a direction, they're going to follow you. But if you don't let the actor embody the character to begin with, yeah, you're not starting off where the actor's the strongest. And that blew me away. I was like, oh my God, because I've always, like, throughout this entire, and this rewatch has been so awesome. I'm really excited that listeners are going along with the rewatch with us. It's been really cool to watch Tarantino grow in the different eras of him. But one thing is stayed true since Reservoir Dogs, which is like, this dude gets actors to just eat it up. And as he's admitted, like his stories would fall apart if it didn't have the right actors. There's some films, like Ridley Scott was on the panel, and I was thinking, like, Ridley Scott's films don't live or die as much on the performances. Like, Ridley Scott is not known for getting the best performance out of actors, but he's known for just visual storytelling, right? But really, Tarantino's defined by the actors he puts into play. And I think that you can see that with Sam Jackson. Sam Jackson, even in all his Marvel stuff, is like, he's great, he's fine, but like he's incredible in every Tarantino movie, especially this one. Sam Jackson is so funny and so wickedly awful, and it's so great. And comparing it to other films, I would say the similarities are, dude, just more and more, I'm so impressed and excited about the performance he gets from actors. They seem like they're having fun enveloping characters. It's so great. And, to compare it maybe critically to other works, again, I have to come back to, I don't see as much depth, but this movie has grown on me. So I think that has changed in talking with you guys. You guys have revealed a lot of the kind of the underlying tones and maybe a little bit more that I wasn't reading into. So, this film's only going up for me. In comparing it to his other works, and I'm interested to see where this lies once I actually put my list together. Guys, this might be the hardest list.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult.
Like, top 5 MCU, top Nolan movies, that was like relatively cake. This is going to be hard because I've enjoyed aspects of almost every film we covered. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to next week's episode when we talk about The Hateful Eight. So watch that on Netflix, listeners, and go through it with us. We're excited. Chris, we actually have an interesting poll coming up, and I want to shout this out at the end. Chris, tell listeners what the next poll is, because it is a write-in, so I know feedback is going to be harder. We get more feedback if it's just a button click and deciding, but we really want to hear from you and some interesting ideas that you have. Chris, tell us what the next week's poll is.
So for a next week's poll, we've decided to forego the actual poll, and we're really just asking you guys a question. The last couple of films that we've reviewed from Quentin Tarantino have all been alternate takes of historical events. And what we want to know is, if you could have Quentin Tarantino write an alternate take for any historical event, what would that historical event be? And how would you want it to unfold? We're super interested to hear what you have to say, and we can't wait to see what you guys submit. All submissions, the best submissions, will be read next week on the podcast, so it'll also give you a little opportunity for some exposure. We love our fans, and we want to make sure that we continue to build that community. So we can't wait to hear your participation.
Please
Absolutely.
Respond.
Love God, please give. Yeah, I mean, he says the best, but honestly, if you're the only one that responds, then we'll listen.
We'll read it. Yeah.
We'll read it.
Absolutely.
You're on there. So just submitting it gives you, and the winner will get what, Chris? What is the winner getting this week?
A ton of affection from us. And gratitude.
And a production deal to get this movie in the works. We're going to fly you out to LA, and we're going to make this thing happen. We're going to bang down the doors of a studio and get this project done.
Maybe we should start giving out prizes.
No, screw it. No. Chris, I'm going to say it right now. My money's going on the line. You're going to get a $10 Amazon gift card, which can buy most of Tarantino's works on Amazon on video. I'm going to give you a $10 Amazon gift card. You write in your favorite response, and I will send you one. Once we're done, we'll get mailing information and all that. We are doing a giveaway, guys. Your submission gets a $10 gift card if it is the winner. We'll read all submissions that are interesting, but we will pick a winner on the podcast next week. So I'm laying it down right now. I'm putting my money on the line. I want to hear from people. This is how badly I want to hear some good ideas. And then we're going to pitch them to Tarantino. And if he makes the film, then you're going to get like an option, and that's going to be way more than a $10 gift card. So that'll be really cool.
Potential.
So really excited to hear from you guys, and really excited to talk about Hateful Eight. I'm really interested in diving into this Netflix breakification, and excited to hear what people think about that. So that's going to be cool. That's going to be on next week's episode. For all of us here at Pop-O-Holics, I'm going to wish you guys a great week. Enjoy your workout or your drive or commute or however you've gotten through this episode and helps you get through it. We appreciate you listening. Have a great week, guys.
Thanks for listening.
Consume consciously, everyone.
I have no idea the logistics of a giveaway, but we will figure it out.